on Goblin Reddit. Today's story is...
My sister tried to convince me to sleep with her fiancé. I gathered the whole family together, showed them the evidence, and 16 years in prison later, justice was done. My older sister, Maria, is about to marry her boyfriend Matthew in just a week. They have been together since university, and as Maria is 5 years older than me, I was still at secondary school when she started bringing him home to meet the family. I remember thinking that Matthew was great at the time, probably because I was young and admired him in some way. I saw him as a kind of older brother, someone who made my sister happy and was there to support her. That's how I perceived him, and I was sincerely happy for Maria because he seemed like a good match for her. However, looking back, I realized that Matthew didn't treat me like a younger sister. He was always overly friendly with me, like those people who seem to have ulterior motives. It's hard to explain in words, but you know those men in the family who make you feel uncomfortable? The ones who seem to be flirting, or who look at you in a way that makes you want to quickly look away. That's how Matthew was with me. At first I didn't even notice. I thought he was just being very kind, or maybe he paid more attention to me than most. It didn't occur to me that his actions could be anything other than innocent. As I grew older, I began to pay more attention to small details. He wasn't just being nice. There was something strange about his behavior towards me. It started to make me feel uncomfortable because it wasn't just anyone. He was my sister's boyfriend. I remember there was an incident during a party that Maria organized at our house while our parents were away. It was a night with music, laughter, and everyone drinking. Maria even encouraged me to join in the fun. In fact, it was my first experience with alcohol and, like most beginners, I ended up drinking much more than I could tolerate. Before I knew it, everything was spinning and I felt dizzy. I decided the best thing to do was to go to my room, hoping that the discomfort would go away if I got some sleep. As I was staggering along the corridor, trying to keep my balance, Matthew suddenly appeared. He saw that I wasn't feeling well and insisted on helping me to my room. I told him it was okay and that I could get there myself, but he continued to insist. Finally, he ended up accompanying me there. What happened next is a bit hazy. I remember finally getting to my room, waiting for him to leave so I could close the door and get some rest. But Matthew wouldn't leave. Even though I asked him to go, he stayed in my room as if he had no intention of leaving. He kept hugging me, running his hands through my hair, whispering in my ear. I don't remember exactly what he was saying to me, but it wasn't appropriate. I just thought about how much I wanted him to stop and how uncomfortable I felt with the whole situation. He even tried to push me towards my bed, and every time I moved his hands away, he tried again. Fortunately, before the situation got any worse, Maria came into the room. She saw us and told Matthew to leave immediately. You can't imagine the relief I felt when he finally left. Afterwards, she helped me to lie down and I was finally able to rest. The next morning, when I woke up and began to remember what had happened, I knew I had to talk to Maria about what had happened. I expected her to be upset, especially with Matthew, but she wasn't. She acted as if it was no big deal. She told me that Matthew had also been under the influence of alcohol and that his behavior towards me had not been intentional. Then she said something that I will never forget. She said that since my sister and I looked so much alike, Matthew had probably confused me with her. Maria also made me promise not to tell our parents. She said it would only bring trouble and that it wasn't worth it. When I objected, she made me feel like I was exaggerating, that I was the one making a drama out of something that hadn't happened the way I was saying it had. In the end, I didn't say anything because I had been drinking too, and maybe I had misinterpreted everything. But after that night, I couldn't see Matthew in the same way anymore. Whether consciously or unconsciously, I began to avoid him. Whenever he came to visit, I tried to make sure we were never alone in the same room. If he tried to hug me, I would pull away or make up some excuse to leave. I no longer felt safe around him. As the years went by, as I grew up and moved away, my interactions with Maria and Matthew naturally became less frequent. Life distances you from some people, but I think part of me intentionally distanced myself too. Those uncomfortable memories of Matthew remained in my mind, but I buried them, refusing to think about them too much. It was easier to ignore everything and move on with my life. Anyway, now Maria is going to marry Matthew. I would like to be happy for my sister, but I think it's a terrible idea. My mother has been helping Maria plan her wedding for months, and she has even offered me the role of bridesmaid, which I accepted because she is my sister. Maria has been talking about her wedding for as long as I can remember, and, despite my opinion of Matthew, he is doing everything he can to make her dreams come true. He has agreed to all her plans, no matter how extravagant, and is covering most of the costs, as our parents don't have much saved for a wedding. At least that's okay with me. As her maid of honor, I have noticed that Maria has made certain unreasonable requests throughout this planning process. At first I attributed it to the normal stress of a bride. She was under a lot of pressure, and I wanted to be understanding. But over time, her requests began to seem less about the wedding and more about controlling me. For example, she asked me to cut my hair, saying she didn't want me to stand out next to her on her big day, although I didn't do it. She also insisted that I wear a long-sleeve dress, when all the other bridesmaids would be wearing sleeveless dresses, and asked me to cover up more. At one point, she even suggested that I dye my hair from blonde to brown, because since we look so much alike, it could be confusing. What's worse is that she has even made comments about my body. I have always been someone who exercises regularly and takes care of herself, but lately Maria has been pressuring me to eat more and stop training. She has told me directly that she doesn't want me to look better than her at her own wedding because my figure makes her feel insecure. Although I have agreed to wear the dress she wants and to do everything possible to please her, I have had to draw the line at some of her other demands. I told her I wasn't going to cut my hair, diet, or change my lifestyle just to make her feel better about herself. To me, these requests are unreasonable and unfair. As expected, Maria did not take my refusal well. She has been passive-aggressive with me ever since. Anyway, this week is her bachelorette party. Yesterday, Maria contacted me to see if we could meet for lunch. I assumed it would be about the wedding, maybe some last-minute detail or an update on one of her bridesmaids. I didn't think much of it and accepted, but I could never have prepared myself for what she was about to tell me. She told me that her fiancé, Matthew, had always been in love with me. At first, I thought I had heard wrong, but no, she repeated it, explaining that she had always known. She went on to say that Matthew had admitted to her that from the first moment he saw me, he had been attracted to me. I was completely shocked to hear this, because you know what I think of Matthew. And even if he wasn't with my sister, I couldn't see it any other way. There's also an important detail. When he first saw me, I was a minor. How could it be possible that a grown man, who was already dating my sister, could feel that way about his younger sister? It was disgusting to even think about it, but Maria went on to explain how, over the years, his supposed crush had never gone away. She said it wasn't a big deal because he hadn't acted on it, but she admitted that he had told her that he still thought about me to this day. Hearing all this made me feel even more uncomfortable. I didn't understand why Maria was telling me these things, and why she was still planning to marry such a man. I asked her directly why she was sharing these details with me. I didn't want to know anything about her fiancé. However, if she was looking for advice or support on this, I would be willing to help her. My answer would be clear: cancel the wedding as soon as possible. But Maria was not only going to go ahead with the wedding, but according to her, as she had never asked me for anything in her whole life, now she wanted to ask me for this one invaluable gift. She even presented it as something she could give me as a wedding present. Maria looked me in the eye and told me she wanted me to spend a night with her fiancé. When you hear something like that, you look for signs on the other person's face, hoping to discover that it's all a joke, but my sister was completely serious when she said it. She even seemed a little sad, which makes perfect sense. My own sister was asking me to sleep with the man she is about to marry. This wasn't just wrong, it was terrifying. I wasn't going to sleep with my sister's fiancé, let alone someone like Matthew. She explained that Matthew had decided that he didn't even want a traditional stag night with strippers like other men. According to her, he had begged her for only one thing: one night with me, which, according to my sister, wasn't such a terrible thing. She told me that Matthew being with me was much better than strippers because it would help him get me out of his system and start the marriage without any lingering feelings. I asked her at what point she thought telling me this would be a good idea, and, even worse, how she could still be thinking of marrying a man like that. I asked her why she wanted to be with someone who openly admitted to being in love with her younger sister. I told her that if she had any self-respect at all, She should leave Matthew now while there was still time. She wouldn't even lose much money on the wedding, because most of it had been paid for by him. But instead of coming to her senses, Maria began to defend him. She said he wasn't a bad person for having feelings for me, and tried to convince me that it was completely normal for older men to sometimes feel that way about younger women. She said it all came down to biology after all. He was trying to convince me that this behavior was somehow normalized, trying to make me believe that it was no big deal. Maybe it is in other cultures, but not in mine. Maria went on to say that Matthew was an incredible partner in all other respects. She described him as loving and understanding, and highlighted how he was paying for most of the wedding expenses without complaining about anything she asked for, but to me that didn't justify anything. It's as if the money gave him permission to sleep with me, which was even more repulsive. Then she put all the pressure on me. She told me that what Matthew was asking wasn't really unreasonable, and that if I didn't agree, it would cost their whole relationship. That is, Matthew would be upset with her for not being able to be with me. According to Maria, asking me to sleep with him was just a small thing in the big scheme of things, something that would make him happy forever, and then they could start their marriage happily. In fact, she said that if he really loved her, he should be able to do this for her as her sister. And if all that wasn't repulsive enough, she even tried to justify it by pointing out that, since she was a sister, she wouldn't even feel jealous after he and I were together. This person sitting in front of me, so casually suggesting something so twisted, could not be my sister. Maria didn't just sound delusional, she sounded like someone completely out of her mind. My own sister was sitting in front of me, willingly trying to offer me her fiancé and defending her actions as if they were completely normal. It was a case of share him with my fiancé, it's okay, it's all in the family, and she couldn't see how inappropriate all this was. I understand that pressure and anxiety about the wedding can affect a person, but this was beyond the bounds of normalcy. Perhaps it was time to seek professional help. I looked her straight in the eye and told her that she could consider her marriage over before it had even begun. I made it clear that I wanted absolutely nothing to do with her, Matthew, or this wedding. I also informed her that I was going to expose her and her fiancé in front of everyone for even making such an inappropriate request of me. On hearing this, Maria tried to argue with me, but I was so furious that I got up and left immediately. As she has not been able to convince me, and she knows she won't because I have made it very clear, she is now writing me messages, begging me not to tell anyone. She knows exactly what will happen if I tell our parents or anyone else the truth. Honestly, I can't stop thinking about what she's about to do. I mean, imagine marrying someone like Matthew, a man who has been lusting after your younger sister for years, a man who felt so bold that he not only confessed his inappropriate infatuation to his fiancée, but also convinced her to ask her own sister to sleep with him as a wedding gift. Just thinking about it gives me goosebumps. My current reasoning is that I don't want to be in the middle of a drama by revealing what he has asked me to do. I just want to avoid the wedding and never see them again. But at the same time, I know what this wedding will do to my sister if it goes ahead. That marriage is doomed to fail, and I could prevent it. So I don't know if I should just stay out of this problem. That is my doubt and the reason why I am here. Update 1. I can't believe I am receiving so many responses to my post in just a few hours. My inbox has been filled with hundreds of direct messages, and to all the unknown men who are contacting me, please stop. I am already upset enough, and the last thing I need now is to deal with your inappropriate messages. Having said that, I also want to acknowledge the positive side of the messages I have received. They have not all been negative. My sister is about to voluntarily enter into a marriage with a man who has openly admitted to having a disturbing and inappropriate attraction to me. She is introducing something very unpleasant into our family, and she is defending it as she does so. That is not only disturbing, it is dangerous. And it is now clear to me that Matthew must be exposed for who he really is. If I don't speak out about his inappropriate behavior, who will? My sister is unwilling or unable, so I am her only salvation. I keep thinking about what could happen if he really becomes part of our family. What if he turns his attention to someone else, maybe one of my younger cousins or some other relative who might not know how to recognize or deal with this kind of behavior? I shudder to think what this man is capable of doing if no one holds him accountable. He has already crossed the line with me. What's to stop him from doing it again with someone else? To all those who have encouraged me to seek therapy, I want to thank you for that too. You are right. Therapy can help to resolve some things. But that is something I have been doing for some years now. For a while, I ignored it. I kept it in some corner of my mind and I tried to act as if it didn't matter. But when I realized that it was affecting me, it was very prudent of me to ask for help. Update 2. 3 days have passed since my last update. My sister has tried again to convince me to accept her unpleasant request. And as if things couldn't get any worse, she has now stooped so low as to offer me money. Yes, real money, as if money would make me forget how repulsive Matthew is. Specifically $5,000, which I assume is money that Matthew himself has offered to give me, because I don't see how my sister could have that amount available so easily. Not only has she lost her whole personality because of this man, now she is also trying to act as an intermediary. Today I decided that enough was enough. I couldn't keep quiet any longer. I knew I had more than enough evidence against Maria and Matthew to prove what was happening. I had saved all their messages, voice recordings, and everything else they had sent me in their attempts to pressure me into accepting. With all that in my possession, I decided it was time to involve my family. I organized a family meeting at my house, where I invited my parents, grandparents, and some of our cousins. I didn't warn Maria, and obviously I didn't invite Matthew. When they all arrived, I sat them down and told them I had something very serious to share. I wanted them all to pay attention to what I was going to say, because before I started speaking they were all chatting and laughing. And what was coming up was not something to laugh about. I told them how Maria had been pressuring me to be with Matthew, her future husband. I showed them the screenshots of our conversations in which she begged me, tried to make me feel guilty, and even offered me money to do it. I also showed them the voice messages she had sent me, with Maria's own voice saying all these things. I also told everyone about how Matthew had apparently been in love with me for years, even when I was a minor. I explained how Maria knew about his feelings and still decided to stay with him. And finally, I confessed what had happened that night at the party. I told them how Matthew tried to take advantage of me when I was under the influence of alcohol and vulnerable, how he refused to leave my room, how he hugged me, touched me, and his inappropriate touching. I told them everything, no matter how uncomfortable it was for me. My father was the angriest of all. He was red with rage, and my mother also seemed furious, although she didn't show it as much. My grandparents remained silent, but my grandmother hugged me. Meanwhile, my cousin seemed at a loss for words and didn't know what to do. I know that many of you were worried that my family might not believe me. Believe me, I had the same fears. But I had so much evidence that they all believed me without asking any questions. The messages and audio recordings were enough to give credibility to what happened a few years ago, even though I had no proof of it. They didn't doubt a single word I said. My parents also came up to me, gave me a big hug, and told me I had done the right thing by telling them. I don't know if I like to admit it in public, but I burst into tears while my mother held me, along with my grandmother. My father, who is sometimes more reserved with his emotions, looked like he was about to burst into tears. But he also seemed ready to explode with anger. He kept saying, "How dare that man touch my daughter?" My grandfather said he was willing to go to Matthew's house and confront him. He said he didn't care if Matthew was younger, stronger, or whatever. An older man like him could still stand up to someone like Matthew. My father agreed with him, and for a moment, the two of them seemed so determined that it almost seemed as if they were planning a strategy. I am not in favor of violence. I want to make that clear. I think Matthew should face the consequences of his actions in a legal way. But somehow, I felt protected by them. Even my cousins were willing to join my father and my grandfather. Tonight, my mother and some of my cousins stayed with me at my house to keep me company and make sure I felt safe. Meanwhile, my father and my grandfather went to Maria and Matthew's house to confront them directly. But they went alone because they thought that if more people went, it could lead to a worse situation. I'm a bit nervous about what's going to happen. I don't know how Maria is going to react, and I don't know how my father and grandfather are going to react. I'm afraid Matthew will make them angry, and the situation will end very badly. Not for Matthew's sake, but for theirs. You can't take the law into your own hands, at least not here. As for Maria, I really hope for her own sake that she makes the right decision and stays away from Matthew. It's not too late for her to see the truth and save herself from what would be an absolutely terrifying marriage. As angry and hurt as I am by what she has done, I still want the best for her. Update 3. First of all, let me tell you what happened the night my father and my grandfather confronted Matthew and Maria. When they arrived at his house, they expected Matthew to at least deny everything. But, to their total surprise and indignation, Matthew admitted without any shame that he had feelings for me. He didn't confess absolutely everything, like the money, but he did say that he thought open relationships were a good idea and that he saw nothing wrong with being able to explore, since I was over 18. However, he denied what happened that night, when I wasn't. To make matters even worse, which was what I feared, he said that they couldn't understand it because they were from a different generation. My father, who was already boiling with rage, completely lost control at that moment. He punched Matthew right in the face. My grandfather didn't even try to stop him because at that moment, everyone knew that Matthew deserved it. Meanwhile, Maria was trying to defend her partner. She was very embarrassed that everyone had found out about her request to me. She kept telling my father that she couldn't believe I had revealed everything to the family, but she wasn't saying anything to Matthew, who was making things worse. My father then turned to her to tell her what he thought of the matter. He told her how disappointed he was, how upset he felt that she could even think of asking me, her own sister, to do something so horrible. And he told her that he expected more from her, like having called off the wedding when all this came to light. And yes, both he and my grandfather made it clear to her that they expected her to do the right thing and not marry Matthew. But Maria was completely determined to get married, so she started to defend her fiancé. She told them straight that she couldn't live without Matthew, and that if it came down to choosing between him and her family, she would choose him. My father and my grandfather argued with her some more, trying to make her understand, but it was like talking to a brick wall. Maria was completely blinded by the twisted idea of love she had for this man. At this point, Matthew just watched, and after the blow he no longer had any modern opinions about relationships. In the end, they realized that there was no way to make her see reason, so they left after telling her that they no longer wanted to have anything to do with her either. Since that night, the decision has been unanimous in our family. No one, not a single person, will attend her wedding. We are all disgusted with Matthew and absolutely horrified by Maria's actions and decisions. My parents, grandparents, and cousins are all on my side. They believe me, they support me, and they want nothing to do with them. Of course, Maria contacted me afterwards, angrily blaming me for ruining her wedding. I've had enough of her, and I don't know how she can turn things around here and make me feel guilty. At this point, I didn't even waste time arguing and just blocked her. I don't know what will happen with her wedding. I may seem naive, but I still have hopes that she will cancel everything at the last minute. It's more of a hope for her own sake, but if she can't protect herself, then marrying that man is what she deserves. Maybe I'll have an update after the wedding. Whether it's good or bad now depends on her. Update 4. We, that is, my family and I, did everything we could to make her realize the mistake she was making and stop the wedding. But no, she got married, and now she will have to live with the consequences of that decision. And no one in the family attended. And to make matters even worse for Maria, even some bridesmaids also skipped the wedding after finding out. As far as we know, only a few friends, who either didn't find out or didn't care, attended, plus Matthew's family, with whom the same thing could have happened. I would like to say that this is the end of my story, that Maria will have a happy marriage, but I have a feeling that sooner or later I will have to return with another update. I don't know if soon or after a few years. Update 5. Coming back after 4 years is a long time for an update, but I always knew this day would come. I thought it would be when Maria's marriage ended, but that is far from over. And she has many more warning signs in front of her than she had before she got married. But she is still madly in love with him and will follow him to the end. In the last few months or year, several complaints were filed against Matthew for exactly the same thing he tried with me. Some complaints are just attempts from people who have been able to get away from him, and others have not been so lucky. His trial ended a few weeks ago, and he has been given 16 years in prison with no possibility of parole. My mother has been in touch with her because Matthew's case is well known here, and I even know some of the victims, although I'm not close to them and I haven't spoken to them. My mother and the rest of the family haven't spoken to my sister since the last time, but my mother thought that this was the moment to contact her as a way of reaching out to her so that she could get out of that situation. But she hasn't done it and has decided to continue with him despite everything that has come to light. This is absolutely worse than what had happened before, and yet she continues to defend her husband and leave her family aside. I can't imagine how bad a person must be mentally to get to this point, but my sister needs a lot of help that she refuses to receive. I guess my story will be one without an ending, where people can't see they've made a mistake and will live without their whole lives. My sister plans to follow Matthew to the end if necessary, which is where all my family believes he should be.